Russell Wilson extends the hands he has. Wilson, quick throw. And it's
good.
Intercepted to Malcolm Butler. Butler has it at the 1. Malcolm Butler stepped in front of the throw.
No way.
And the Patriots have possession with 20 seconds to go. Second and goal to go from the 2. Toss sweep right for James White. Tucks it under the right arm. Cuts it upfield. Driving forward. Diving to the goal line. A touchdown. And a title for the Patriots.
I can't believe it. You're doing some research here.
Yeah, so Cam the intern
Got his own podcast.
got his own podcast, but it looks good.
Looks good. Logos, good
Maybe
graphics.
it sounds good too.
Oh, Cam, hardworking kid.
Cam?
Yeah.
Every day that kid's stock goes up a little
Does
bit.
it?
A little bit.
Ryan, her 3 on the way. It's good off the backboard and in. Murray, what a take by Tucker. Jones, another steal. Spin on Caldwell, and the layup's good.
I would like to see you hold a mirror up to yourself and interview yourself. As good as this was, it could only be better if it was all you.
Tuning in, I was a fan. I was like, man, let's do it.
Cam, thanks so much for having me on. I'm happy to be here.
Joined today for the first time, Cam Isimone. Gallagher's going to have to shoot it from beyond the arc. And it's good. Jacobs for 3. He got it. My goodness, what a shooting performance by Jacobs.
I think Cam's Corner is great.
Tune in to Cam's Corner.
This kid's going to make it. He's going to make it here.
All right, guys, and we are back. Welcome back to another episode of Cam's Corner. Today, joining me, radio play-by-play broadcaster for the Patriots on 98.5 The Sports Hub, and a writer for the Sports Hub as well, Bob Socci. Bob, thank you again for taking the time and joining me today.
Hey, Cam, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, of course. So originally you're from Auburn, New York. You played baseball on a championship team in high school, graduated from the University of Dayton. And before we get into the questions about the Patriots, I wanted to know what made you decide you wanted to become a sports broadcaster?
Well, first of all, thanks for touching on my lone athletic career highlight. I don't know how much I contributed to a state championship, but I was part of a state championship team. And, before I started playing baseball, I was watching it and wanted to broadcast it from the time I did start playing it. It's kind of one of those things that I think a lot of people in our business share, where I was commentating on my own backyard wiffle ball games and the playground ball that my friends and I used to have, spend a lot of afternoons in the summer and the fall, regardless of what the season was. We shifted from baseball to touch football, flag football, to street hockey, to basketball when we could. I was always the guy that was calling the games as I was playing. And then while in Little League baseball, I was lucky enough to grow up, as you mentioned, in Auburn, where we had this beautiful Little League complex with a press box and lights and a public address system. And apparently, the people that ran the league, the commissioner and his assistant, and some of the coaches had heard my words echoing off in the distance and knew I wanted to be a broadcaster, at least knew that, this little kid certainly had a gift for gab. And so I would be invited to come up in the press box when I wasn't playing games. So we'd have double headers because of the lights. We'd have a 6 o'clock game, 7:30 game. If I was playing at 7:30, I went into the press box at 6 and I got to announce some of the batters' names on the public address system, vice versa. I played the first game in my uniform, went up in the press box, got a bag of popcorn, a hamburger, or whatever, and did the same. Announced the batters who were coming to the plate, and that's was born out of this dream of becoming a broadcaster someday. Still wanted to play second base, if not catcher, for the Mets, but eventually became a broadcaster and lived out one of those two dreams as a child.
Right. So looking back at it now, with all the success you had over the years and everything you've accomplished with the Patriots and before the Patriots as well. Who were some of the role models you looked up to in a way when you first started broadcasting, if you had any?
Yeah, I did, for sure. I had role models all along the way. Some I never knew. Some I only listened to and watched on television. Dreaming of someday having a job like theirs, and they would include people like Kurt Gowdy, for example, was the voice of every big event on NBC. People here who grew up in Massachusetts. Of older generations knew him as the Red Sox announcer. I knew him, of course, as the voice of the game of the week and the World Series, as well as the big NFL game that NBC had. And I was an AFC fan as a kid. I had an allegiance to an AFC team at the time, and so I watched more of the NBC games. So Kurt Gowdy was one of my favorite football announcers. Baseball, though, was my love from the start. Really, my first love and my most passionate love as a sports fan. Early on and for much of my life. And the Mets broadcasters on WOR, Lindsey Nelson, primarily Bob Murphy for me, and Ralph Connor, they were really the first voices of my youth. But I was one of those kids who, Cam, interestingly, I got into radio eventually and really have made more of a living in radio than television by far. But I was a kid who grew up on television. A lot of people, for a lot of people in our industry, it's the opposite. They grew up listening to the transistor radio, under their pillow in bed at night, and then eventually get into television broadcasting. Well, I had the great fortune of being in an area where our cable system had WOR out of New York, WPIX out of New York. So you got the Mets and the Yankees during baseball season, plus other New York teams in other seasons. We had WSBK TV 38 eventually. So I watched and listened to a lot of Ned Martin and even Hawk Harrelson before Bob Montgomery joined Ned for the Red Sox games, and a number of other stations, including one out of Canada that carried Hockey Night in Canada, plus the Blue Jays and the Expos. And so every day and night, if I wasn't out playing games, I was in our finished basement, really that I had to myself. It was my man cave as a kid, watching games, often turning down the sound and imitating the announcers that I loved. And as I got older and got into the industry, I developed relationships with mentors, some of whom are very prominent, very well known, the best in our profession. Others, much lesser known, but no less impactful on my career in life. I was one of those kids who, when I got serious about it, through internships, as well as just reaching out to people on my own, writing letters, made contact with pros in the business who were where I wanted to be and broadcast in a way that resonated with me, people that I admired and respected. And I always sought their advice and their candid feedback whenever I could.
Yeah, certainly it's easier a little bit now for me to contact people like yourself and, around, because like the internet, emails and all things like that was obviously tougher for you back then. But that's kind of like the same path I'm trying to go along, is make these connections so people know, one, who I am, and two, once my, I guess, broadcasting career per se tries to, take a little bit more of a leap, people will know me and I can keep these connections along the way. So that's pretty cool to hear from where you started. So that's kind of leads me into my next question is what was your first official job offer in the business, and how did it come to you?
Yeah, my first offer in the business was with the Rochester Red Wings. Being when it comes to out of college job opportunities. While I was in college, though, I worked as an intern for the Cincinnati Reds, and I was in their publicity office. And I was really lucky because the Reds were, they were a thrifty operation, to say the least, at the time. Marge Schott was the owner, and we had a very small publicity department. There was the full-time director, vice president, Jim Ferguson, his assistant, John Browdy, our secretary, Connie, and me. So I was this college kid that got a lot more interaction with broadcasters and writers than probably most interns, particularly at that time, would get. And also, to your point, because there was no internet at the time, we're going way back. This is the late 80s. There was less reliance on technology and more personal interaction. It was a time when Major League Baseball had just instituted this new stats program, and with IBM, a partnership. And so, my primary responsibilities were to make sure that all the game releases with all the media information and the statistics, as well as for each team, as well as all the leaders in the American League, National League, game results, etc. All that information was printed out, presented nicely, and made available to the media who covered the team. And again, because they weren't surfing the internet during the games or prior to games, you had a chance to talk with a lot of people, and they had questions for you. And if you had to look up information or get my boss to look up information, well, then I had that interaction, servicing people in the business, but also observing them as they came and went, just how they carry themselves, eavesdropping on their broadcast booths and listening to some of the people that I really truly admired, almost idolized, if you will, listening to them, and also, I think as important, watching them while they worked. And over the course of time, I was able to go down into an empty broadcast booth because the Reds were playing at Riverfront Stadium, which was also the home of the Cincinnati Bengals. Each team used different press boxes. The home plate area of the baseball setup wasn't practical to call football from. So the Bengals press box and radio booths. Well, they were down the first baseline, the right field line, as the field was oriented for the Reds. So I would wander from my behind home plate press location during Reds games and go spend a couple of innings down the right field line talking into a tape recorder. We're going back again to the days of audio cassettes. And I would call 2-3 innings to play-by-play of every Reds home game just to practice my craft and distribute tapes and ask people to listen to them and critique them. Well, longer story, a little bit shorter. When I graduated from college, I did a year as an intern at the University of North Carolina, again, working behind the scenes in sports information, media relations, once more given an opportunity to interact a little bit with some of the best in the business calling the Tar Heel games under Dean Smith. After I graduated, I parlayed that PR experience into a job with the Rochester Red Wings. And I had these audio cassettes with play-by-play, make-believe to an audience of one, me, but nonetheless, there were samples of my work on tape. And I was able to go to the general manager of the team because there had been an opening in the radio booth for home games. As luck had it, my partner was Josh Lewin, who's the full-time broadcaster for the Red Wings. He later became, of course, a longtime Major League Baseball announcer, and even a couple of years ago filled in for the Red Sox. Josh has done the San Diego Chargers, UCLA, and a number of other sports as well. But Josh was the full-time announcer. He's a kid just like myself. And his partner got a job at a competing radio station full-time. So they needed somebody to call a few innings of home play-by-play. And well, again, I used this experience as a PR guy to get a job in the first place, wore a lot of hats, did whatever was asked of me. And it was a wide range of responsibilities, which included selling advertising, helping out the groundskeepers, unloading promotional items when the big trailers rolled in before, bobblehead night, etc. And I presented a tape to the general manager. He liked what he heard, or at least he didn't dislike it enough to keep me off the air, and he gave me that opportunity. And that was really my first on-air experience. And the first game I broadcast was between the Red Wings and the Pawtucket Red Sox, and the first at-bat was Mo Vaughn versus Mike Messina.
Wow. Yeah, that must be cool to look back at it on how things just evolved, and just like each opportunity came in and came, like just how it all went in line. Because for me, like I'm still young and I'm just starting to do this, so like I said, I mentioned to you, I had my first internship at the Sports Hub, and just watching that and how those professionals, like behind the scenes on camera, with Beetle and Zoe, and how they do all that is just incredible to me. Like I listening to them as a kid, and then now being behind the scenes working with them over the summer was just so surreal. So like that just motivated me more to keep sticking with it. So it's cool, like again, to talk to people like you and other people in the profession that have took these lapses and been through all these little internships like that. So like, how did each internship, like in college, like how did you know what to apply for? How did you know what job opportunities, or was it just kind of like you just submitted resumes into all these job opportunities that you wanted, and then they just kind of came in? Or
well, Cam, this is one thing I think that underscores the importance of relationships with people. When I was a sophomore at the University of Dayton, I had never heard of anything called sports information, but I saw this kid in all my classes. He always wore a different college T-shirt. One day it was USC, the next day it was Notre Dame, the next day it was Miami, whatever. And we struck up a conversation, recognizing, okay, he must be a college sports fan. Start talking about sports, and he told me, well, I work in the sports information department. What's that? He explained it. You want to work there? Sure, I'll put in a good word for you. I started working there. Because I was in the sports information department and did a good job, one of my predecessors in the Dayton SID office was the intern for the Reds. He graduated, went on to the University of Houston to work in their athletic department, and he floated my name to the Reds director of publicity. And I stepped into his shoes late in the summer of 1987. I was going back to school for the start of my junior year. He was on his way, and that door opened for me because of his good word, his recommendation. And the same thing with the opportunity that I had with the Red Wings. Again, it was a situation where I had, while working with the Reds, made contact with the person who eventually became the general manager in Rochester. He was the traveling secretary of the Reds at the time. He liked me. And when I finished my internship at North Carolina a year later, I reached out to him, and he said, I think I might have something for you. And, along the line throughout my career, there's been instances like that. And frankly, the opportunity at the Sports Hub arose out of a visit in the fall of 2009, 3+ years earlier than when I was hired. And it came about a decade later after meeting someone who helped open that door. So you never know when it's going to happen. And the story that I'll try to quickly share regarding that, and it's to your point about making contacts and reaching out to people. And the thing that I will stress, which I tell young people all the time, Cam, is when you do that, do it because you want to be better at the craft. You want to learn from them. Don't do it because you want them, me, if you're a younger person, to help you get a job, take the next step. The motivation has to be getting better, wanting to listen to candid, constructive criticism. Nobody wants to be ripped just for the sake of being criticized. That's what sports talk radio is for. In this case, it's got to be constructive, right? So I had developed a relationship with a broadcaster that was born out of a chance meeting. I was visiting family over Easter weekend in Auburn, New York, close to Syracuse. A friend of mine worked in the Syracuse athletic department in communications. They were hosting the NCAA regionals. And he asked me if I wanted to volunteer and help them out at the regional basketball games. I said, sure, why not? I get a chance to watch the games for free. Maybe I'll meet somebody. I'm standing at the court, halftime, and one of my favorite broadcasters then, and certainly even more so now, Gary Cohn, who was at the time the radio voice of the Mets. Gary's walking off the court to go to the bathroom. I reach out my hand as he's passing by. I say, excuse me, Mr. Cohn, I just want to tell you that I'm a great admirer of your work. I really enjoy listening to you. And he says, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a broadcaster for the Frederick Keiths. And here he's got like 4 minutes to get to the bathroom and get back to the court for the second half. And he seemed more interested in what I had to say than I was in what he had to say. And as he ended the brief conversation, he said, listen, send me a tape, just put it in the mail to the Mets, and I'll listen to it. And I did it. And weeks later, I got a call back from him saying, hey, I loved your tape. In fact, I liked it so much, I brought it to my boss. And he took it to his bosses at then CBS-owned WFAN in New York. About a decade later, they were consultants when the Sports Hub launched in Boston. Mike Thomas, the program director, was in place at the time. Rick Radzik was his assistant. I wanted a chance to meet with Mike because I had moved to the Boston area in the interim. My wife was from here. We'd moved back here. And I was trying to knock on doors. And I asked the people at WFAN, hey, can you help open the door for me with a 98.5? And they, and all it took was just an email. Hey, Mike, you should meet this guy. He does good work. He's a nice guy. And that was it. And I got an opportunity to sit down with Mike and Rick. Met with him for about a half hour. I left a CD with samples. Again, by that time, we'd moved up to CDs of samples of my play-by-play at the Naval Academy. Rick actually listened to it, and he liked it. And 3 years later, out of the blue, I got an email when Gil was retiring before his final regular season game. And the email was from 98.5 The Sports Hub, and they wanted to hear more of my work. And it went back to this chance meeting, again, just seeking an opportunity to introduce myself. All I wanted, Cam, was maybe a turn on headlines once in a while, anything to get my foot in the door. I didn't hear a word from them for 3 years or so. And I was going back and forth between Boston and Annapolis, Maryland, still calling it Navy at the time. And then, out of the blue, I get this email. But it all went back to the fact that I had an opportunity to be in the right place at the right time and meet the right person who helped me.
Exactly. And then since then, in 2013 in April, the rest was history. Now calling 9 seasons with the Patriots over the radio, alongside with Zoe, being able to call 1 Super Bowl is insane. But then you guys have been able to call 3, and especially like the 28-3 comeback, the Malcolm Butler interception at the goal line, just truly incredible to see where it all started with you and learn the whole career path of yourself. And like we mentioned before, previously, making those connections and talking to people like yourself, for me, I told you, it's it's cool to talk, have, on my pages, I talked to Bob Socci, I talked to, Sean Grandy or people like that. But for me, it's more of I want to learn. And learning from the best is truly, I take great pride in that. And I'm very grateful for people taking the time to just talk to me. And, because I'm not a couple hundred people listen here and there, but it's not I'm some big sports person now. And for you to take the time and a chance on me, I agree. I appreciate it a lot. So,
yeah, absolutely. And as you go through your career, you will in all likelihood, reach out to some of the people at the Sports Hub. Maybe you say, hey, Beetle, do you mind listening to my air check? And you want to hear constructive criticism, and that's going to help you get better. It's going to strengthen that relationship with him. And then hopefully eventually, you'll be in a position where you pay it forward. And that's the way it's really been, I think, from the start for me. I've been so lucky to have so many people who were interested and available to talk to me. And what I found too, Cam, is that often the most successful people in this business, the most famous, were also the most accessible. It's really amazing how many people that I really, really admired that I wrote to. And like I said earlier, and I started out with letter writing. I got a chance to meet Bob Costas and sit down in his office, and he recommended me for the Navy job. And not to name drop, but that's because I wrote a letter, sat down with him, did an interview, and stayed in touch through the years. And he liked me, liked what he heard enough. Just when an opportunity arose, and I asked him because, again, he got to know my work as much as me. He was able to put in a good word for me for whatever that was worth. And along the line, there have been so many others that have helped me. And even today, Cam, I'm always open to constructive criticism. I try to be a harsh critic of my own work. I cringe a lot of times when I hear it. But I'll just give you a quick story. After my first Patriots game in 2013 from social media, I generally do not advise this, but after the Patriots played the Bills, my first game, regular season, they were down most of the game. They had to come back and win it on a Stephen Gostkowski field goal to end the game with just a few seconds left in the fourth quarter. And afterwards, I checked my notifications on Twitter, and some fan wrote, "You're the worst broadcaster ever." And I replied, I said, "I'm so sorry to disappoint you. I'll try to be better." And then he replied, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a second chance. Just give the time and score more often. And I thought to myself, he's right. I need to give the time and score more often. So, the constructive criticism advice, it comes in a lot of different ways. Often the criticism on Twitter is not constructive. It's destructive for sure. Yeah. But nonetheless, I think if you're open to getting better and you want to get better, if that's what motivates you. And again, I can name drop today a little bit, but I never did when I was trying to rise through the ranks. Because that wasn't what was important. It was the relationship with those people, but also, the advice that they were giving me, and what I was trying to do to implement that. Because it really didn't matter whether you know a person or not, or whether can you process and then implement their words of advice in your work.
Right. So when you first started, talk about more of those days. When your first games with the Bills, was there ever a moment? For me, sometimes throughout the bit, when I first started at the Sports Hub, Ray Bork was in studio, I think a week or two after. So a 20-year-old kid, second year in college, I was a little starstruck to see Ray Bork, have a conversation with him. He signed one of my dad's old jerseys he had when he won the MVP in the All-Star game in '96. When you first started with the Patriots, was there ever one of those moments where you were like, oh, this is insane? I'm calling play-by-play for Tom Brady and Gronk. And was there any feeling like that, when you first started?
I don't know if there were ever any moments where I was awestruck about the individuals, but it didn't seem real, if that makes sense.
Right.
It still is in a lot of ways, especially when sometimes I hear calls from the Super Bowls in particular, and I still feel so detached from it. I don't, and especially when I watch games, Cam, the last couple of postseasons, last year the Pats got in for the wild card, but as I watched the AFC Championship, the NFC Championship, the Super Bowl, the last 2 years, sometimes I feel like I've never done that. That must be so cool to get to broadcast those games, even though we've been spoiled. As you mentioned earlier, Zone, I've had the chance to do so many of those games, too many compared to my peers. Certainly more than I deserve. And now when I think about having called games for Brady, Gronk, Belichick, some of the other names that we know are all timers, future Hall of Famers, present day Hall of Famers in some cases, it's still hard for me to believe. It doesn't seem real. So I don't think that I was ever awestruck. I was nervous, particularly asking Belichick questions in the early going, because you get that look in mid-sentence, you feel like you're completely lost. But nonetheless, I think over time, that eventually, that feeling diminished. But as far as actually looking at them in an awestruck way, I don't think I ever did. But nonetheless, when I listen to the highlights periodically on Tom versus Time or the series that ESPN ran last year, or the America's Game, 3 Games to Glory, NFL Films productions. Yeah, then it's like, it dawns on me, you had a chance to be part of that, at least just to commentate on it, because I think of the great announcers, doing the play-by-play of Willie Mays or Joe Namath, Joe Montana, I should say, really more so. And the all-time greats, Gretzky and Muhammad Ali in an individual sport, not Bob Socci calling a Patriots game.
Right. But like you said, it's crazy though, to look back at and say, like, I was a part of that, like the 3 Super Bowls that you were fortunate enough to call with Zoe. And like, those are the games, like, you look back and, like, like you said, I get to be a part of that. That's really cool. But for someone like me, who's trying to get into the business, after college, and learn, again, like we said, like throughout the whole episode, learn from the best. When there's, games like preseason, like just passed, like games that like really don't mean anything, but they do mean to something in a sense, like dead space is like a huge thing as a broadcaster that, separates like good from great. So like, for someone like you, how did you learn to, break up that dead space and really make it into something, like really make the game seem like it means something during that, like, dead space time, I guess?
I used to put so much pressure on myself to try to have a clean tape. You hear this from guys who've been in the business for a long time, all the time. The pressure and the imperfection with every tape. You want to find like a clean inning with good crowd sound, with good play-by-play that demonstrates all of your abilities as a broadcaster. And it's impossible to find like one that you really, really love. So I always think about like the pressure I put on myself for those games, but also the reality is, and it doesn't matter whether you're calling high school, college, pro games, to somebody listening, if not to a lot of somebody's listening, that's the most important game in their lives. And it's the most important game you're going to call. I know it's cliche, but like that next game, that next moment, that's the most important. Joe DiMaggio had the famous line when somebody asked him, why is it so important for you to play well every night or to play hard? And he said, well, somebody may be watching me for the first time. And I do think about that as a broadcaster. Now, we talk about the preseason games. I made some egregious mistakes in these last few preseason games. And I've lost sleep over them because whether it's preseason or postseason, it's important to get it right, and because those games are important. They're not only preparing you for the regular season, but it's a reflection on who you are as a professional and your credibility. Now, as far as like dead spaces in broadcast, I think it's just a repetition. It's years and years of calling games. I mentioned all those minor league games. There's been no better teacher in my career than the experience of going through a long minor league baseball season. I've been in places like Clinton, Iowa, Fayetteville, North Carolina, Charleston, West Virginia, Beloit, Wisconsin, calling games in April when there's nobody there and it's freezing, or in July when it's really hot and humid and the ballpark's less than half empty or less than half full, and you got a pitcher out there, like some 19-year-old kid who's a prospect who can't find the strike zone, but they've got to leave him in because they got to develop him and let him work out of trouble. And it's the most boring sporting event you've ever witnessed, but you got to find a way to get through it, even if you can't make it interesting. Nonetheless, you want to do your part to try to make it as listenable as you can. And so I think all of those experiences over the years, high school football, small college football, mid-major basketball, the Navy games that I did, all the minor league baseball games that I did, all prepared me for my stint with the Patriots. And preseason games are not postseason games, but they're a hell of a lot better in doing preseason games in the NFL. I mean, than postseason games in the Midwest League or the South Atlantic League, which I've done.
Yeah, right. And for somebody like me, like my first year of broadcasting was this past year, and I was by myself on a lot of the calls. Like there wasn't a color guy with me, so they appreciated me just taking it upon myself just to do it by myself. Like usually not a lot of people want to do that. I'm from Rhode Island. I went to Rhode Island College my last 2 years. My freshman year was cut short due to COVID, so we didn't have a lot of opportunities that we did in my sophomore year. So then with the tapes that I had with that, the podcast that I have, I created over that time, built up a little resume, and again, I sent it to the Sports Hub, and they took a chance on me for that this past summer. So now the resume seemed a little bit better, and I sent it to the University of Rhode Island, and they accepted me for their sports media program. So now I'm going to be calling more than one. Like all I did was basketball. I did basketball, baseball, and softball. So now my first soccer game I'm calling is this Friday, and I'm going to be the color commentator. So now certain sports that I've never called before, I'm trying to do research and come up with like charts of players and stats just so I know what I'm talking about. Like you said, that preparation and things like that. Again, I appreciate you taking this time to, teach me, from the early stages of how it, what it takes to get to that next level.
Yeah, and preparation is such a key. Vin Scully just passed away, of course, and he always had a line he would say is the key to broadcasting: have the humility to prepare and the confidence to pull it off. And I think confidence comes from preparation. But I think the experience of doing sports that you're unfamiliar with and having to collect information, talk to coaches, talk to players, do your research, that goes back to my point about all those games in the minor leagues and filling dead spaces, because this experience is going to help you become a better basketball announcer, a better hockey announcer, a better football announcer down the road. So you're in a great spot. I mean, congratulations on the opportunity that you have. And, again, and I really mean this, Cam, like when I was doing those games and I think back about to them, like they were every bit as important as calling Patriots games. And I really, really mean that. It sounds insane. I mean, there aren't nearly as many listeners, of course, but nonetheless, in those moments, those events, they're your network opportunities. They're your chance to do what you love to do. And so as much as I stress like wanting to be good at it, also enjoy it. I don't think I enjoyed a lot of the games that I called when I was a lot younger as much as I should have.
Right. And it's been a ride, and I can't wait to start. I can't believe it's already here, because like I was thinking about it when I first applied in around April, and like now that whole summer just flew by. So I'm very excited to start. And again, Bob, I appreciate you taking the time to kind of wrap things up. I just wanted to ask you the feeling that it was for you when you were named Massachusetts Sports Broadcaster of the Year last year in 2021.
Yeah, thanks. That was really humbling. I never thought that like an award like that would mean a whole lot, frankly. Part of the reason I felt that way was because I never won any awards like that. So maybe I was just trying to rationalize. But it was very humbling, and particularly to hear from some of the people that voted on it, because some of them are people that I respect most in this marketplace. And when somebody like that tells you that they like the way you do your job, I think it's more about how you do your job, or how you try to do your job in some of those cases, than the actual sound of your voice and how you call a game. And I think that really is important. As I've gotten older, Cam, and learned more about life in general, but the business especially, I think that's another thing that young people should know, is that relationships and also the impressions you make on people outside the broadcast booth are every bit as important, if not more so, than how you sound inside the booth. Now, some people are so exceptional, and you see it, whether it's in a studio, at the sport, I shouldn't say the sports hub, but a studio, television studio, radio studio, or a broadcast booth at a game. And some people can be a certain way and just be talented enough, exceptional enough that it doesn't affect their career negatively. But what I've always found for myself, and I think for the vast majority of people that I've interacted with, for the good people in our business that try to do things the right way, that try to approach their jobs with perspective, and remain above, reaching for the lowest common denominator, or complaining too much, or calling attention to themselves rather than the games too much, if at all. I find that the people that I respect and appreciate that do it that way are usually the most successful and the most enjoyable to listen to and watch, and they have the longest success. I think you find a lot of careers to be very fleeting in our business because people burn bridges, and I think it's really important in advising young people. Look, there might be times you get frustrated, you get upset, you get lonely, you're making sacrifices, you're on the road, you're in a marketplace where you don't want to be, whether it's reporting for local news or calling, minor league hockey, whatever it might be. But, how you treat people there is going to be an indicator of how you treat people when you get to the next level. and you meet the same people on the way down that you met on the way up. So that's important to stress, because I didn't always do things the right way when I was younger. I let my frustration get the most of me. And, to get an award like that, a long way of answering your question, that was especially, I think, rewarding. The fact that it was voted on by people I respect, who do their jobs the way I hope I do mine.
Yeah, for sure, Bob. And again, I appreciate you taking the time. As I said throughout the whole episode, I love to always ask guests before I end it off, what did you think of Camp's Corner? Like, again, like we talked about with the constructive criticism. I always like asking professionals in the business, athletes as well, coaches, like just so I can get better along the line.
I like it. I think you do a really good job. And I'll tell you that one of the hardest things for me always has been being natural and kind of, just at ease, especially in a podcast format, or like we've talked about the telecast, the preseason games on television as well. And it's just a natural conversation between two people talking about something we love. And, I would just I would encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, and to continue to contact people, listen to your work, critique it yourself. When you have some guest on that, where you maybe, as you grow and develop, where it's not necessarily an informational interview with somebody in the business, but an athlete or a coach, where now you're putting them in position where you want to question them and glean information from them, then I would suggest like using those tapes to send out to people in our business, to hear even sharper constructive criticism, not necessarily stringent, but sharper points and advice and suggestions. My last words, Cam, keep them on. And I say this all the time when I speak to kids. Like, if I can do this, you can do this. But we've all been where you are, in your position, going to school, doing the internships, starting out, wanting to get better, wanting to climb the ladder and have a career in broadcasting. So that's important to know. Just, understand that everybody's been there. Some get there a lot faster to the top. Others, like myself, really labor to get there. But you can do it.
Thanks again, Bob.
Enjoy the journey.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And we'll talk soon for sure.
All right. Stay in touch.
Thank you. Definitely.